All right, today is the February Seneca County IDA meeting. Welcome, everyone. David, our AI operator here, we could replace you soon with
Yes,
AI.
very soon, I'm sure.
All right, we have a pretty quick agenda today. We're missing our finance authority, and so we'll go quickly through our financial statements. We're going to start with the approval of last month's minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes from last month?
So moved.
Ernie, thank you. Is there a second?
A second.
Adam, any comments, questions, changes? All in favor of accepting the minutes?
Aye.
Any opposed? We have accepted our minutes. The next item on our agenda is the review of the unaudited IDA financial statements. These are through December of 2024. So these are basically allowing us to look at how we did in 2024 versus how we did in 2023. I will not try to channel Bob Kernan, but I think the main points here, initially on going to the income statement, which is a few pages in, the IDA lost $233,000 last year. This was due primarily to the fact that our, what I would call our deal flow was fairly light, and our expenses were what they tend to always be. So we always have kind of lumpy revenue streams, and in 2024 we had very few income events. And we then deplete our reserves to that amount each year. If you go to the balance sheet, we still have quite a bit in cash and CDs, but it is always worth noting that we want to be positive on the bottom line. Yes, sir.
I'd like to point out that the expenses really hit the budget right on the money, and I think Sarah's doing a good job of handling that.
Okay, so our expenses are on target.
Right on target, but the
revenue is a problem.
revenue is the challenge.
Any questions on that? We have quite a cushion, but that's, fine. It's been,
Seed money.
well, yeah, and also as Tom Kine, recent board member and longtime board member would say, it took a long time to acquire that reserve. We don't want to fritter it away. Is there a motion to accept the minutes?
We don't
have to
We don't
do it.
actually need to this month because we'll be sort of approving all of those once the audit is done.
Okay, so we'll more on that for the full year to follow. The next item is a resolution on a pilot that was granted to Keystone Mills. Keystone Mills is in the southern part of the county. They have a grain operation down there, a fairly large one. Sarah, do you want to take us through that?
Sure, so the resolution and the letter that everybody has in your packet is basically asking, the company is asking for an extension on their sales tax exemption. So this project, this is the second time they're coming to us for an extension of this, but they had some pretty significant construction delays right after their project was approved by us. And they really only sort of got what to the eye seems to be a complete facility, at least on the outside, maybe a couple months ago or so. For folks that have driven down 96, you've seen it there on the corner. But they estimate that they have this year, they're seeking the exemption until the end of the year. They estimate they have about $75,000 to $175,000 in sales tax payments that they would be having to make on some items that they're still being billed for as part of that project. So they're seeking the extension so that they can, use more of their exemption that was awarded to them. They are nowhere near and will not ever use the full amount that was awarded. They won't have a need for that realistically. So, you know, they're sort of well within the range. Just to be, you know, perfectly clear with everybody here, their sales tax exemption did expire in December of 2024. So in a perfect world, they would have come to us before that and asked for this extension instead of sort of coming to us just afterward. But a few of the board members felt like it was important enough to bring this to the full board for, you know, discussion and review in a way to support this company in their project.
So if anyone's seen this, it's a fairly sizable mill south of here, and the way I look at it, and I think this is Howard's viewing it, is they get a sales tax exemption on their materials, and it's just taken them longer. They initially found that NYSEG was not able to provide them with the amount of power they needed, so that was part of the reason I think that their project kind of stretched out over time. So we're granting them more time, we're not granting them more money, or more of an exemption, just the same amount over a longer period of time.
What do they have to pay sales tax on that? Isn't that coming out of the agriculture? All those grain bins and everything? You gotta pay tax on that?
Sales tax, that's what the exemption covers, is the sales tax on that.
Yeah, I didn't think they would have to.
Yeah, they
A
said
farmer wouldn't have to. They're in the farming business.
their description of the items was for some bills related to completing their current phase of construction. Plus they're looking at sort of additional phase to add some more structure, bins, and pellet mill equipment.
Well, don't
So,
take me wrong.
yeah, I don't-
I'm not against this. If they need it, they need it, but,
You thought they were exempt already?
yeah.
I'm not sure.
And I know where the main plant is, and up on 96 is another. Is that the same?
That's the new one.
Okay.
Yeah,
I knew it was gonna be a big deal.
it is.
Yeah, their main plant, so if
Okay,
you're
well, I
heading
think
south
that
on
is-
96, their main plant is kind of, if you were to take a left at the light there, and then their new
Yeah,
plant is
very
right on the
halfway
corner
down.
on the right.
No,
Yeah.
it's a big business. It's covering a lot of central New York. And it just seems to me that they should be sales tax exempt on a lot of that stuff.
So-
I would say that that business is probably retail, because you're selling the product versus you're selling the feed maybe, and not necessarily the raw material. I don't know if that would make a difference because it's a production.
No, but once they, because they're delivering to all the farms around that's got cattle and stuff, so they're selling the feed to
But
the
this is-
farmers, but it seems like when they're building that place, if a farmer was putting up those grain bins, he wouldn't have to pay tax.
Yeah, you're right.
So apparently they do then, or they wouldn't be doing it, so.
Must be. I definitely, in this case, would have to defer to them and sort of their expertise on knowing all the logistics of what is sales taxable for them and not.
It
You know,
seems
'cause-
odd. Certain things they would have to. but-
Well,
Okay.
it comes out the same, I think.
Pardon?
It comes out the same whether they're allowed
Yes.
to avoid that otherwise. Do we have a motion to accept, to approve this resolution?
So moved.
A second?
I'll second it.
We need a roll call on this one, Kelly.
Mr. Murray,
Yes.
Mr. Cure,
Yes.
Mr. Brownell,
Yes,
Ms. Weiss,
Yes.
Ms. Capelli,
Yes.
Mr. Guthrie,
Yes.
Mr. Tom Murray, Mr. Lott, and Mr. Shipley, absent, motion carried.
Okay, thank you. Next item is a request by an organization called Locate Fingerlakes. Sarah, do you want to cover this?
Sure. So Locate Fingerlakes is chaired by former State Senator Mike Nozzolio. They serve as sort of a regional marketing type of organization. I use that somewhat loosely because it's, purely volunteer organization, but they do have a few writers that they work with, and they essentially do regular newsletters. Some of you may get them in your, email inboxes. They do profiles on like professionals in the area, businesses, business leaders, that kind of thing. And their goal is to sort of promote life in the Finger Lakes and try to attract people here. So they are seeking $5,000 from the IDA and marketing assistance, basically to help continue their efforts and help cover the cost of their writers. I do know they have reached out to some of the other area IDAs. I do not know if those IDAs are going to be approving the requests or not. I happen to have a conversation with Ontario County, and they had their IDA meeting just last week and opted to table it because they still had some further questions that they wanted answered. So just for transparency's sake, I don't know how anybody else is really going to handle this sort of request.
And do we know, is there a board? I know Mike Mazzolio is essentially the executive director, I would say. Is there a board, do we know?
Yes, it does have a board.
Do we
I
know?
would have to look at their website. I don't know off the top of my head the list of who all is on it.
And do we know what their overall budget is? Because newsletters are pretty low overhead. In today's world especially, they don't have postage costs. They're probably sending it out electronically.
Mhm.
And do we know, so you said they're approaching other IDAs. Are they also asking others for 5,000?
I know Ontario, they asked, I think, for 7,500.
Because I'm just curious what they were, it seems they were going to pay writers from your description.
So I have seen their posts, primarily the place I see them is in LinkedIn. And what they try to do is highlight positive economic and social and cultural events that occur in the broader Finger Lakes area. Mike Mazzolio, former state senator, still fairly active in making things happen. He was one of the principal organizers and supporters of the Sampson, which is now New York State Veterans Cemetery, Finger Lakes. I think this is a way for his organization to continue to do the kind of work they do. That's the sense.
How long has he been?
Why don't we have him come to a meeting and explain it to us? Might be good.
I think that'd be a great idea, Ernie.
I know him, I know some of the stuff he's working on.
I think that's a great idea.
I can do that.
Does anyone want to make a motion to approve this? I've worked with Mike on a bunch of different things. I think he's not, his funding sources are limited, but he is, I think, creating a positive impression of this region. So I think I'm in favor of doing this for them.
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, any opposed? And I do think we ought to get Mike in here at one of our meetings for him to tell us what he's doing with it.
I know
Okay.
that we're working on that thing for getting the electric, because they're gonna put all the stuff there in the ordinance, but they can't, the electric company won't help them a bit. This is what you got with this Keystone Mills. They just will not service us.
Yeah, Mike, I think he's, no longer an elected official, but he hasn't, stopped sort of doing positive things for this region, I really do.
So I will let him know that this was approved. We will probably not invite him for our March meeting, only because we're gonna have a pretty full agenda with our audit presentation and everything at that point in time. So we'll probably wait until our May meeting to have him sort of come in and give a presentation on the organization and some updates on what they're doing and planning.
Either that, if we need it sooner, have a special meeting.
I think we could bring him in just at a regular meeting, I think. Next, Jeff Shipley, who's not here. Ernie, do you have anything to share with respect to the Board of Supervisors?
Yes, tonight we're having a Republican caucus. County chairman has found somebody that will take advantage of the job of intern on a part-time basis, and will advertise for a full-time. So tonight is kind of a meet and greet, the gentleman. I don't even know who it is at this point.
So the county, which has not had a county manager since the last one was
Right.
moved on, this is an interim.
Yep, this is an intern, yep.
It's a good thing.
So we're heading in the right direction.
Good.
I knew you'd like to hear that.
Yes, yes.
That's all. Other than that, it's normal business.
All right, well, thank you, Ernie. Sarah, anything from you?
Yes, there are a few items that I wanted to discuss with everybody for other business today. First is just some updates on the Fingerlakes Rail project. So we're not ready yet to have any kind of final approval of a potential pilot for that, but we did finally finish negotiations with the company and the other IDAs, so that's a win in my book so far. What has been agreed to is that the company will make annual pilot payments based on essentially 3.5% of their annual freight revenue. And then that will get divided and we'll get 1/6 of that. And then we disperse that to all the different municipalities proportionally based on the tax rates. So we did do a cost benefit analysis that was actually included with the briefing memo, and everybody has it on the table in case anybody, we can kind of walk through it a little bit just so everybody has a chance to kind of get familiar with this one. But we do have public hearings scheduled for Monday, February 24th and Tuesday, February 25th. We've got them kind of scheduled back to back because we have to do 5 of them, so hopefully they'll be pretty brief. We'll be live streaming and all of that. So just to kind of go through the cost benefit analysis briefly so everybody can see it. This project ended up with a benefit to cost ratio of 952. So what that means is that for every $1 in cost to the public, this project is bringing $9.52 in benefit. Okay, so their total estimated property tax exemption, and just as a side note, this is only for the Seneca County portion of the project. Every other county has to do their own, so we did not look comprehensively at, all of their capital spending and their tax abatements in the other counties. So their property tax exemption over a 10-year period in just Seneca County is estimated at $994,000. Estimated sales tax exemption for this project is $376,000. They have some other grants that they are anticipating being awarded, not by the IDA, but state and federal transportation grants. So we did factor those in because that's public funds. So that's about $4.8 million, bringing the total public cost of this project to just about $6.2 million. Okay, and then on the benefit side, we have estimated ongoing payroll. So the way that we figure this is their job creation and retention that they put in their application. They indicated that there would be 51 full-time equivalents created and or retained with an average salary of about $96,000 a year. And then we, estimate that for the 10-year duration of the project. That brings us to a payroll benefit of just about $49 million. The Seneca County capital cost for this particular project is about $8.6 million. Then we've got what the actual property tax payments are going to be, the pilot payments, $733,000. Don't have anything for this one under temporary sales tax revenue, the IDA agency fee. So this is going to be paid out over time per our agreement, and it's going to be in a given year, 1% of their capital costs in the county in that year, or $5,000, whichever is higher. So their total over the 10-year period estimated agency fee is about $101,000. And then that other benefit that you see here is the lease payments that I mentioned, or lease abatements, I should say, that I mentioned at our previous meeting. So the company has, rail crossings. Anytime that a municipality has to run infrastructure under that crossing, they would presumably have to pay a lease to the railroad for the right of way to do that through their property. Well, the railroad does not charge them those lease payments, so that's a benefit to the community there. So that's where all of the numbers come from for this particular project.
And the agency fee that comes to us is 1/10 of that number or per year for 10 years, $10,000. This 101,000.
If you're divided out evenly over 10 years. The 101,000 is what our total agency fee would be, but
On average, 10,000 a year.
yes.
So as you look at what our net income is in any given year, 10,000 is nice, but it doesn't cover the full amount that we spend.
Then if you go in a little further, so I didn't think it made sense for this project to try to make the pilot schedule fit in our usual sort of format because there are so many different parcels. So that's why we have some additional attachments here for everybody. The first one is project tax parcels and values. So this, is all the property tax IDs, the towns, tells you what school district, what the current assessed value is, and what the tax rates are currently for all of those municipalities. It also estimates what the full tax payment would be for each of these properties right now. Next page in are the tax rates. So this is, just listing out for the various combinations what the tax rates are. And then the very last page, and I apologize that it's a bit on the small side in print, is the actual pilot schedule. So this shows an actual breakdown of what each municipality would expect. So they're, like I said, over a 10-year period, their total pilot payment is about $733,000. The way that breaks down is the Village of Waterloo would get about $64,450. Town of Fayette would get about $12,000. Town of Romulus about $18,670. Town of Seneca Falls $16,600. Town of Varick $10,460. Town of Waterloo $17,560. The county would get about $95,500. Romulus $100,000. This is school districts now, sorry. Romulus School District about $195,200. Seneca Falls about $60,000. South Seneca about $67,500, and then Waterloo Schools $175,200. So just to kind of give everybody the rough breakdown for that.
Well, am I correct that if this wasn't approved, they wouldn't get anything because this development would not go forward, correct?
It's kind of a weird one because this project is really renovations and maintenance and improvements to the existing rail line, so there's not really new construction like a new project, but the company has basically made the argument that without a pilot they would not be able to ultimately stay in business, that they wouldn't be able to afford the maintenance that's required annually to sort of keep the railroad in the condition that it would need to be to continue serving their customers.
Right.
And that
So
it might be a slow decline, but eventually we would see them,
disappear.
shuttering their doors.
So that, simply my point, we're approving this and this is monies that are gonna come to the communities.
And this is also more money than what's been paid to the communities over the last, this pilot's been 30 years now. It's always been based on a freight revenue payment historically, but it was previously like 2.75% of their freight revenue is what they were making the payment on. So, you know, we've jumped that up, you know, fairly sizable. So there's, you know, every school district, town, you know, the county will all be seeing bigger payments from the railroad as a result of this project than they would if we kept the same terms.
Okay, good, that's what I wanted to hear.
So when will we see a final vote on this?
Probably March.
In March. Everybody clear on this? I mean, this is kind of the nuts and bolts of IDA behavior. So we're granting them $733,000 of tax relief in exchange for the assumption that this is a service that continues to operate in the county. And other counties too.
So that's Fingerlakes Rail. Rob, is there anything you want to add about that project?
No, I guess not.
Okay. Other than that, the only other things that I kind of wanted to touch base on with everybody were some Willard redevelopment updates. It's been a little while since we've talked about it. Obviously, we all know there really wasn't a single master developer that came forward as part of the request for proposals that was issued. Now that the county budget cycle and everything has passed, the supervisors have turned their attention more to Willard and have assigned the county planning department to work on putting together a proposal to the state, Empire State Development. So they are trying to essentially initiate a local transfer of the site. So from the state to presumably the final entity would be the county or possibly the LDC that they are creating. It is also still somewhat presumed, though, that title may have to pass through the IDA or will very likely have to pass through the IDA, which is obviously something you all will need to be aware of and something that will actually have to come to this board for any kind of approval before that happens. There are still a lot of questions that we're trying to get answered in regards to the logistics of how that would work and things that we would hope to have more information on, you know, to present to you all before any kind of final decision is made there. But right now, the timeline is that the county will submit the proposal to Empire State Development around the end of this month. And then it'll have to go through some various state agencies for approval before anything further can sort of happen. I mean, we're still looking, I think, at least a year out before any kind of actual transfer happens. You know, there's a lot of approvals and legal and things that would have to take place beforehand. The state has to go through an environmental review process of the proposal. So one of the things, you know, we're providing feedback to them and input and assistance on that. But right now the proposal is to try to not commit to any specific aspects. You know, so the highest and best use study is being referenced as sort of a vision of the community, but we're not putting that in there right now as sort of a quote unquote development plan, mostly because then that would trigger, you know, involved environmental review of each of those aspects, and we're not prepared right now to do environmental review on a potential, let's say, lakefront hotel. So the proposal is based on an outlook, say, the next 5 years of Willard, and sort of what are the various pieces that we collectively as a community would need to do to sort of get that ready for the next step. So a lot of planning heavy things, you know, zoning updates, you know, maybe some utility kind of planning to figure out how do you bring the campus online in sections. From the IDA's perspective, exploring the possibility of pilot increment financing districts, maybe as a way to help finance debt service on infrastructure build out there. We're also setting up meetings with some of the developers that had responded to our FEI, which was request for expressions of interest, or to the request for proposals. We'll also be doing some additional outreach, but it's really to try to figure out how do we help position this site, for success and sort of transition into a more locally controlled and hopefully flexible process than what it would be, if it were sort of from the state directly to a developer. So that's kind of the update I have on Willard, unless there's anything you want to add.
Any questions?
Last item that I think is worth discussing is the fire in Ovid. So, there have been a lot of organizations in the community that are really helping on the sort of social services, human services side of things. United Way, Catholic Charities, Steps, any of them can speak to the efforts that are sort of happening in regards to the people that lost their jobs and the people that lost their homes. I do know that the Department of Labor came down and was working with folks afterward, trying to help them get set up with unemployment, trying to help them, get connected to other opportunities. But in the long term, we've been having conversations with the business owners that were impacted, most of whom actually owned their buildings. Unfortunately, it seems like many of them are probably underinsured, or insurance won't cover really what it would cost for them to rebuild. So it's still very much unclear what the future will actually be of Ovid. I mean, we're looking to support them however we can. We certainly would love to see people rebuild, but there may be a very real possibility that that is not feasible for some of these folks. We've been having conversations with the state, trying to figure out what assistance might be available. The short version of it is, because these businesses are mostly retail, restaurant, diner, laundromat, grocery store, there really aren't direct state grants or incentives that are going to be able to assist them. The IDA is largely prohibited from assisting retail. There would be some workarounds potentially for this, grocery store, Ovid would be, as a food desert. So there are some, of our workarounds there in terms of it would be retail providing a good or service that's not otherwise available. Potentially that argument could be made for something like the laundromat. That's something we're exploring, but also the IDA could assist a project if less than a third of it was retail. So if there's a chance that some of these folks would rebuild and would put, apartments back up top on upper floors, there might be a path to a project there. Another thing that we've been talking about and are having conversations with banks on is the possibility of defederalizing our revolving loan fund program. And that's like a whole other discussion probably for another day of getting into the weeds, but essentially that could allow us some flexibility when it comes to our loan funds, especially if we were to transfer that fund from the IDA to the EDC and had the EDC run a revolving loan fund. That organization would not be restricted by the same retail provisions that the IDA is, and so then could open up gap financing potentially to some of these folks to help them with rebuilding. So we'll see. There are some planning grants available at the state that could help the village with things like a comprehensive plan if they wanted to think sort of bigger picture. Personally, I think that's sort of the way to go in the immediate term. It's just a matter of figuring out logistics of who would apply for and manage and administer a grant like that, and who would come up with the local match that's sort of needed to make that happen. But that's what I have as far as Ovid recovery updates.
Questions? Are folks familiar with Ovid at all? Ben, you are. It is.
I was in conversation with Brent Eva, who had the laundromat and the steps office and the apartments that are in between.
Yep.
And he said that his insurance covered what he could have sold the business for, but it would take twice that
To
to rebuild.
Yeah.
And I know that the Big M had been sold to some people out of Rochester, but Sue Sorrenzioni still owned the land. She carried the paper. So I'm not sure how they're disentangling that, whether they may well bankrupt that business, the grocery store business, but Sue then still has the land. She's talked about
Well,
rebuilding.
she'd have to buy it back. She sold everything to them, but she holds the mortgage.
Oh.
So there are some logistics there to figure out. Unfortunately, thankfully we have a low cost of living, relatively speaking, in Seneca County. And unfortunately, what that means is we have low property values, but we still have fairly high cost of construction. And so part of the difficulty is going to be, can anybody afford to build anything, and is it going to be worth what they end up putting into it from a bank's perspective? I think that's going to be the tricky thing, is the financing side of things for this.
And the market for the Big M was the summer people. I mean, they could survive through the winter, but the summer was their 4th of July was their biggest holiday. Whereas most grocery stores have Thanksgiving and Christmas, and it was big for them, but 4th of July was the big one for them.
What is the village planning on doing, or what is their thought with it?
So right now, since I'm sort of kind of close to that whole area there,
Okay.
right now there's one effort which is kind of short term. I mean, very short term was to try to make sure the people that were affected kind of got back on their feet. There's been enough donations and there's enough to kind of make that happen. The next question is, what about the businesses? Option number one is to see if any of them can relocate to some other facility similar to what they were in before to function while the whole process of either deciding to build or sell takes shape. There is a store on Main Street in Ovid that was a grocery. It's right now an auto parts store. This is all local knowledge here. It's a CarQuest store. The thought is you could get the guy that's in the CarQuest store to move to another building, stick a grocery back in that location, and at least that would be running when the tourist season comes along. I mean, I'm in the tourist business. It is true that when people arrive for a week and they come in on Sunday, they need to stock up for a week, and they've got to go somewhere. There was a pizza place, Italian Kitchen. There's a restaurant there that's been not operational, a place called the Golden Buck. I called the owner of the Golden Buck and said, would you let the pizza place go in there? And they said, yes, we would. So there's sort of an effort underway to at least get these businesses back on their feet. We've also gone and said, well, what's it going to cost to rebuild? I think Ben had that about right, about twice of what people are insured for. Then the other question is, what's the market value of their property? And presumably, some, maybe not all, but some may decide to sell, some may not. In a perfect world, one entity would come in, buy the whole thing, and then in conjunction with that planning process decide, okay, let's put a grocery store in there and then find a tenant. And then that's where the IDA, one way or another, is going to get involved there. So theoretically, the IDA could be that entity that buys the whole thing and then operates as a landlord, or sells it eventually to someone to operate the whole thing.
As the example of the building we're sitting in, we don't want to be a landlord.
No, we don't want to be a landlord. It's not but in the absence of someone else taking a step toward doing that, the IDA might do that. I mean, historically, IDAs buy property and turn them into industrial parks, and then try to get them populated. That's sort of the classic IDA model. This, in some ways, resembles that, although it's not 100 acres of industrial space. It's 2 acres of downtown village space. But one way or another, I think, particularly as it relates to the tourism business in the county, it's really important that this thing gets rebuilt. It really is.
Do we know what the plan is for the removal of the debris that's there?
Sure. So there's two steps. One is the Sesslers, who own equipment that can move things around and pick
They're in
them up
that
and put them.
business,
Yep,
yeah.
they're in that business. They're prepared to come in and haul it all away at a very, very nominal rate. They've got to haul it somewhere. We've got a place nearby here that takes that kind of thing. We're told that the fee structure they would take it for is also very nominal. The challenge is, once that gets scraped clean, is, what kind of hazardous materials are there? There were 1,000 gallons of fuel oil. That fuel oil ran the dryers in the washers in the laundromat. It also ran the refrigeration units in the big end. So there's fuel oil all over that property. There was an auto dealer there previously. Presumably, whatever the auto dealer was doing involved dumping oil somewhere one day. So the sense is, after it gets cleaned, some environmental remediation has to happen. The county has grants or grant applications in place for so-called brownfield development. This would qualify, we think, but the idea would be to some way get this into a condition that you can sell it without the buyer assuming all the environmental liability on it. How long is that gonna take? Probably a year, I would say. So if these people wanna stick around and stay in business, find them a place to do that. I mean, there's another laundromat in town. The reason Brent Eva's laundromat was working is because it was servicing kind of the residential community, the foot traffic around that area. I think, no one wants to be in charge of this one, because, everybody wants to avoid the blame if it doesn't work. But, everybody's instincts are right. It's just getting the right people to say, all right, I'll do this. And, that's what the IDA has done in the past. I've been asked to sit on committees. The town of Ovid has said, look, the IDA could be in charge of this if it wanted. I've said that's a little premature. But
a possibility.
It's up to the board eventually. Ultimately, it's up to the board.
Were all of the apartments filled?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, there were about 20 residents that lost their homes and about 60 employees.
So,
That
and
were
the residents
impacted.
found a place to live though.
As far as we know, Ernie, yeah, kind of friends, family,
Yeah.
people get scattered around,
Yeah.
staying in basements and extra rooms, for now.
Well, they even placed some of them in new housing on the depot, the officers' housing. Somebody opened up one of those houses and put a bunch of them in there. And is charging them like half rent.
Yeah. So, more to follow on that. Anything else?
I think that's it for other business.
Yes, sir.
As chairman of the solar committee,
Yes.
I communicated with a guy named Noah Ginsberg, who is the head of the Alliance for Solar in New York State. And I was asking him, with the new administration policies in Washington, what was the outlook for solar going forward? And he was saying that he was still very optimistic. Of course, he's in the business of being optimistic. But he also said that if people have plans and they can grandfather their projects in by starting to buy equipment now, so that, he said, going forward, because what I was asking him for our budgetary purposes, what could we expect looking forward as far as the industry and how much money they're going to spend? And he felt that they were still going to push forward, at least for this year, with projects that are already in the pipeline, that it wouldn't be a complete halt.
Okay.
But
Anyone
he did
else?
say they'd be making decisions individually, and that we need to talk to the people that we've been talking to about that.
There are several in the pipeline, and they're moving very slowly.
Right. And when you have that much money at risk, I think that's the whole game, you know, like how, are the incentives still gonna be there? This fellow was implying that he can lock in the incentives, but things change.
The rate of how slowly some of these move may very well be a whole other president by the time they're ready to break ground, you know, I mean, really.
By the way, did we get payments for the Lodi project?
We've not closed yet.
But we're still right on the cusp.
Yes.
Okay.
Anything else? I have nothing. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?